We thought we would have a couple of presentations from a couple of our colleges just to talk about the processes that they use when they are doing their assessment work. So we've got Christy Stevens from Linn-Benton Community College, who's taken her Friday to come down here and be with us and talk about the processes at Linn-Benton. So Christy, I'm going to turn it over to you. Help me welcome her.
All right, well, thank you for having me. My name is Christy Stevens. I'm a faculty member at Linn-Benton Community College. I spend most of my day teaching and advising students. A small part of my job is I am the chair of our Mentoring and Assessment Coordination Committee, short MAC team, and we are a faculty-led group that has led our college in our assessment efforts. I thought I'd start by telling you about the good old days at Linn-Benton back in the 1990s when we were like on top of the world with assessment. We were bringing in consultants. We mapped our programs. From our program maps, we identified our courses, how they fit into the program map. We wrote course learning outcomes. We took those course learning outcomes, made sure that they were on file in our academic affairs office. We published them on our syllabi. We put those newly minted program outcomes in our catalog. We took all that paperwork, filed it away, and said, check, we've done assessment. And then we just went on with the work that was really important, which didn't really include formal assessment of our programs, but we could say that we had done that. Well, that's the way things used to be. Then the commission came and we got a recommendation. And ours didn't even start with those nice words, well, you're really trying hard. They were just like, you really need to get with the program. So this was a wake-up call for my institution because most faculty didn't understand what a recommendation means. And a recommendation doesn't sound too harsh, does it? Right? So in reality, what we came to know was it meant that our college could lose its accreditation. And if we lost our accreditation, then our students wouldn't have access to financial aid. And if our students didn't have access to financial aid, we really wouldn't have a college. So, and I'll just go off on a little side rant here and come back. So as we started doing this work, and I was talking about, the role the commission played and how this was really important, one of my dearest colleagues came up to me, put his arm around me, he said, come on, Christy, stop threatening everybody. The state of Oregon isn't going to let a college lose its accreditation. Right, there was a school in San Francisco, had over 50,000 students that lost its accreditation. There was actually a summer that Oregon Coast Community College had lost their accreditation, not for assessment reasons, but for something else. So it is possible for institutions to do this. So there was a little bit of a stick for the first time behind this recommendation. So here's what LBCC's response was. We decided to create a team of folks to lead our efforts. We didn't hire anybody new, and we created the MAC team, the Mentoring and Assessment Coordination team. This was a faculty-led team. The deans got together and said, who's doing assessment in our areas already, doing it really well, can talk to other faculty about it and help move this initiative forward. So specific faculty were invited to serve, and I was actually one of those faculty. Now, I will tell you that when I started this process, I was a bit of a doubting Thomas. I've been at the college for a while, and historically, committees at my college don't get work done. And I was like, I had come back from sabbatical, I was freshly recharged, my dean was saying she wanted me to do this, and I said, I'm not serving on any more committees. We don't make decisions. All we do is make recommendations, and managers may take the recommendation or they may not. And I'm really tired of spending all my time making recommendations. I said, there's really cool stuff I can be doing. And she was like, I think you really need to give this a shot. And okay, so I said I would do it. So I go to the first meeting, and I think, I'm going to shoot myself. This is like every other committee I've been on. I go to the second meeting, I'm looking for the gun, and I think, okay, I can either step up to the plate here, or, I can just step off. So in terms of who was on the committee, one of the key early steps was who we chose to chair the committee. A faculty member named James, highly productive. If he said he was going to do something, he was going to do something. And he was the head of our choir department. So James has a reputation of high standards and getting things done. So after that second meeting, I just shot him an email and said, hey, would you like some help? Seems like we could get off track here, and there might be some things I could do to help. Unbeknownst to me, another one of my colleagues, Dana, sent him the same email at the same time. And he said yes to both of us. So while he was, quote, officially our chair, the three of us became the leadership team for the first year or so. Because what you're going to see with people like Dana and James, who earn PhDs and are highly productive, they get hired into management at other colleges. So we started as a team, and then they have gone off and done other things. But it was important that we came together, because what it meant was, as the team was starting to figure out how to work together, there were three of us saying yes to things when work needed to be done, because as was historical at Linn-Benton, people were on a committee, but it was like everybody would step back to see who was standing to do the work. But with James and Dana and I, we were able to get things going, and he was super energetic. Here's the other thing that was unique for us. Committee work at Linn-Benton goes into our contracts, and its other work is assigned. The faculty who served on their mentoring and assessment committee got release time. So the leader, James, got released from 2 courses during the year. All of the faculty members who participated on the committee would get released from 1 course for the year. This is my 16th year at LBCC, and it's the only time I'm aware that that has happened for a committee. We chose faculty members from multiple discipline areas. So we had health occupations. James was in choir. I work in education. We had communication. We had mathematics. We had writing. We had computer science. We had a tentative reach into CTE. We had somebody who said he would help us, but he wouldn't come to the meetings. He was a bit crusty. But we took it, because he actually understood outcomes, had the respect of everybody in his area, and we said, okay, we can work with that. So these were the first steps in terms of how we got started. When our group came together, our tagline became, when we talked about assessment work, faculty-led, accreditation-driven. And so when faculty would say, why are we doing this? Faculty-led, accreditation-driven. The reality was we were faculty-led, manager-supported, and accreditation-driven. And I do want to give full credit to the managers here. On this committee, we had more faculty than managers, but we had 3 deans who served. And those deans said yes to everything that we asked. They also did not run the committee. They were there in supportive roles. And there were times where the committee needed work or research into something that was managerial level work that faculty couldn't do. So for example, faculty at my college don't supervise other faculty. So if there was something that was going to involve workload, we let a dean work on that, because that's not what faculty do there. But the managers were very supportive. The other thing, in addition to being funded with release time, if I needed to bring people together in the summer, we were funded to pay for people to work off contract, and we fed people, and we fed them well. And I just had to ask. The same thing when we wanted to bring in part-time faculty. From the beginning, we knew that that was a priority, and the college has always said yes. And so we have paid part-time faculty to attend trainings and also to attend department meetings where they're talking about assessment. So faculty-led, accreditation-driven. Our MAC team decided, we knew the history of LBCC. We had program maps. They didn't mean anything. We wanted to change the culture at the college. It wasn't enough to just rewrite course learning outcomes. What we soon realized once we got comfortable with each other, in our own way, we were all assessment geeks. We thought that assessment was a tool, and we still believe this, that instructors have in their toolbox, not because you love assessment, because it helps students. It better helps teaching and learning. And so, like, once we owned our inner geekiness, and for example, we had to put a password on something at one point, the password was, I love outcomes, all capital letters. Yeah. I do trainings with new faculty when we hire them at the college. Okay, I make them stand up and do a cheer about loving outcomes and assessment. We just started to own this and say it's embedded and it's threaded throughout everything we do at LBCC. Now, I will tell you in terms of this cultural piece, we've made huge inroads. I don't know that we're there yet. Last year was our first year to have 100% of faculty report on outcomes in 100% of classes. We only had 55% from year-round that did that. Our summer reporting numbers are atrocious. I'm not sure what's going on. Sometimes there are reasons that faculty do not do outcomes reporting in our institution. I can think of a faculty member that was going through medical treatment she was going through cancer treatment. I think she was figuring out what work she could do and what could be delayed. So when I look at who reported in her area, I suspect that she was the one that didn't report, but everybody else was, reporting. And I have another colleague whose son had an incredible illness. I don't think he did this. I think he was trying to figure out what's the minimum he could do to get by. But our deans are the people who stay on top of that. So this year at the institution, what we know is we've got to get higher than 55%. And when I say 55%, that's 55% of our contracted and our part-time faculty. So we wanted to change the culture. The next thing we did was we threw conventional wisdom out the window. When you're looking at how to do assessment, everybody says start with the program. Well, we did that. And remember, we put it in the drawer, checked it off, said we did it, and we ignored it. We decided to start with course learning outcomes. And the reason why? That's what's important to faculty. Look, for all the disagreements that faculty can have between themselves, typically what they agree about is they like students, they want student success, and they want students to learn. So we started with the outcomes that were in a place that were meaningful to faculty. So that was with the courses. Oops. Okay. I'll go back to the previous slide. But this was the graphic that we came up with in terms of how we were going to work. We said we were going to start with student learning outcomes, then move up to the assessment of gen ed learning and program outcomes at the same time, and then do institutional outcomes. Now, I'll step ahead here and tell you, we've done the course learning outcomes, and in terms of institutional outcomes, we adopted those last year. This year, our work is program learning outcomes and gen ed outcomes, and I think we'll be wrapped up by May. Other key principles that we realized with outcomes. We wanted this to be a reflective process. What happens frequently with outcomes work is it boils down to numbers. I have 40 students in my class, 32 met the outcomes. Of the 8 who didn't meet the outcomes, what happened? Or there's a judgment on the faculty. You had 40 students and only 32 met the outcomes. You get dinged in some way. We didn't want that. We wanted continuous improvement. We wanted a growth mindset. So what we have always emphasized is faculty reflection. So at the end of the course, when grades are posted, our process is for faculty to get together. Well, they start by themselves, and then they get together and say what worked, what didn't, and what am I going to do differently next time. We started by having numbers in this process. Originally, the reflection was a 3-page Google Doc form. We're down to a single page at this point. The numbers really aren't meaningful to anybody except the faculty member. When we had those go out to a larger audience, people were calling me up, freaking out. Am I going to lose my job? I know the college doesn't value art, and you're making me put it out there even more. Well, the college does value art, and we're not trying to put it out there to make you nervous. And we realized we were collecting data because we could, And what was important was to collect the data that we needed. So our president believes in continuous improvement. He tries to thread that through the administrative level of the work. We thought, why don't we bring that notion to outcomes? So it's not like you reach your outcomes and you're done. We're talking about closing the loop. Whoever said, I think the former president said that earlier. We're talking about how you get better all the time. As I said earlier, we included part-time faculty in all of our efforts. Here was a key principle. We would move forward even when we didn't know what the next step was. So as I present this to you, it's going to look like we were really together. Sometimes we were, and sometimes we could only get so far, but we would go that far and then trust that we were going to be able to figure it out. And we knew that eventually, we never lost sight of this, that we wanted dedicated time for departments and programs to reflect and showcase their assessment work together. We didn't start with that because, once again, it's what makes people nervous, but we didn't lose sight that that was an important part of our reflection. By the way, these did not come out of one conversation. It took us probably 2 or 3 terms to start to understand those things. So our initial tasks. First of all, we needed to develop a common language. Were we talking about assessing student learning outcomes, student learning objectives? What the heck did it mean? We also wanted to develop a timeline. We needed to connect with our academic affairs office and purchase a smart or an interactive catalog. At the time, LBCC's catalog was online, a wonderful 242-page PDF version, not searchable by the table of contents, but it was online. So Smart Catalog's the version we purchased. What you should probably take away is an interactive catalog. And I shouldn't be promoting a brand. We just call it Smart Catalog and think that's what it is at this point. But what we wanted to do was make sure that as an institution, when we had course outcomes stored somewhere, that if we changed them, it automatically synced to the catalog, and it automatically synced to our course outcome forms, because faculty get tired of typing the same thing over and over and over. And this just seemed like an easy win. So let's get an interactive catalog that would do this. Yeah, well, it was a more expensive catalog, but when I say that we were manager supported, they took a deep breath, they swallowed, and they bought it, okay? We also had to rework our course outline form as a part of that process. And then, here's the big one. Our academic affairs office was going to have to put through over 900 courses as we reviewed and rewrote course outcomes. Part of the reason is, when we go back to way back when in the 1990s and early 2000s, when we wrote course learning outcomes, the consultant that we worked with thought you write course learning outcomes and you don't worry about measurability on the first go around. Yeah, all the faculty in here saying grimace, grimace, grimace. So we had a lot of course outcomes that were not measurable. At the end of this class, my students will love poetry and change the world. You know, it is a wonderful aspiration. It is not measurable. So we knew that we were going to have to go back and look at all of our courses. We also connected with our institutional research office, and this, I have to tell you, has been one of the greatest treats of my life to find these people. I like data. They love data. And they're also rather, they like all things science fiction and fantasy. So when you go into their office, there are flags from the houses in Harry Potter, who's a Gryffindor, who's a Slytherin. And so like when we do things for the MAC team, they know I like Star Trek. So one of our submit buttons says, "Make it so, #1." So we've actually tried to bring some humor and personality to these things. But connecting with IR was really helpful, because as faculty on this committee, we understand teaching, we understand learning, we understand assessment. We don't understand large-scale data collection systems so that you can aggregate data. But they do. So connecting with this office was key. We also had to create an assessment boot camp. And this was a subgroup of our MAC team that got together to develop Assessment 101 presentations. So before we were going to go out to the entire campus and talk about assessment, we wanted to make sure we had our messaging down, and we wanted to practice that in front of a group of friendly people who would give us constructive feedback but not take us apart. So we created Assessment Boot Camp, came up with those presentations. Assessment Boot Camp was also really good for the MAC team because when we came together, what became really clear was even though all of our membership had an interest in assessment and evaluation, we all had different skill levels and abilities. So boot camp allowed us to partner up. And so some of our folks who needed to broaden what they knew would partner with someone who maybe knew something else. And that type of shared learning, even in the MAC team, was important. So after we'd done our work, our boot camp, gotten our principals together, had messages like faculty-led, accreditation-driven, this internal message that we wanted to change the culture, that first fall, we owned in-service. If our college had a theme, it was assessment, and everybody was going to deal with it. So we were running multiple sessions on workshops, how to write a course learning outcome, because it was scaring people. It was absolutely scaring people. So we ran the workshops. We ran them mixed, both contracted and part-time faculty. And later in the year, when departments got together to work on their courses, we paid for part-time faculty to join departments at that point, and MAC team members would go to department meetings to help and support them as needed. The last thing that we did, two of us on the MAC team became accreditors for the Northwest Commission, myself and Dana. And Dana's one of the ones that got her PhD and went off and got a job somewhere else. I will tell you this was huge because one, you learn a lot when you visit other institutions. So when I go on accreditation visits, I am there to serve those other institutions, but I soak stuff up. And I bring things back to my college, sometimes dealing with assessment and sometimes not. The other thing is it gave me a position to talk from, because once you start to do accreditation visits, you are immersed in those standards, and they mean something different to you than looking at a checklist on, in a packet like we just did. I mean, I am much more familiar with those. I have been in conversations, and having faculty members do this in addition to, because usually these are deans or vice presidents who are doing accreditation visits. So as a faculty member doing this, it put me in a position of authority with my colleagues, but it also put me in a position of authority with a recalcitrant dean. And which I didn't know that I was going to need to be in that position. But anyway, it actually was very, very helpful. So, the other thing I would say, and this is something personally that I learned from doing accreditation visits, and it has influenced my conversations that I have on campus about accreditation. From doing those visits, I have truly come to believe that if an institution with integrity and intent engages the accreditation process, the institution will become a better institution. I mean, I became a convert. This, for me, moved from busy work to something that can truly be transformational, because the commission is not interested in telling you how to do your work. They are just saying, here are the things that institutions have to do and have to pay attention to. Okay, so common language, let's talk about this. We had to define assessment, continuous improvement, and student success. So for all of these, we tried to start with the message, look, you're already doing this, because it's true. Faculty are already assessing as students. We're just going to have to add another feature on that says, capture what you're doing so someone from the outside can see that. We also talked about continuous improvement. We're going to close the loop. It's not just going to be you in a silo in your classroom. We're going to work with larger groups. And student success, we teach at a community college. We love students. It's why we're here. You've already got that. We're going to help you add a tool to your toolbox. And that tool is going to be assessment. We don't want this to be busy work. We want this to be something that will make a difference. Okay. Now, in terms of how we were going to do this work, we decided to roll out over 2 years. The first year, we would look at all 100 level courses and developmental courses to rewrite the course outcomes. And then the second year, we do all 200 level courses and CTE courses. So this is your chance to ask me about our hair on fire mistake, because we blew this one big time. Thank you so much. So that looks like a really reasonable way to split up courses, doesn't it? Yeah. What we didn't realize was that 100 level and developmental courses were only about 1/3 of the 900 courses we taught. The other 2/3 were the second year. We just about killed the Dean of Instruction and the Academic Affairs Office along with our Curricular Issues Committee because they had to get everything processed. And I will tell you, faculty and managers stepped up to the plate. The Curricular Issues Committee came in over Christmas break to work. The college paid them to do that. We managed to get everything done. But if you're going to do something similar, I would look at your number counts and not just make this. And fortunately, those people are still friendly with us. They like us. They value the work, but we totally blew this. It seemed like that was a reasonable way to split, and it wasn't. But the takeaway is we staggered by courses how we were going to roll this out. Oh, I left something out. I'm sorry, I skipped this slide. We also had to tell faculty how to write a learning objective or a learning outcome. This was hanging people up. I can't write learning outcomes. So we just decided to make it formulaic, okay? So first of all, a learning outcome has got to be measurable. It absolutely has to be measurable. And we're going to write them in terms of what a student can do at the end of your class. So upon completion of this course, a student will be able to do, you have to put an action verb in there. And we shared all types of verb lists from Bloom's taxonomy. Write a philosophy of education, create a personal health care plan. Whatever you needed to come up with, that's what it was. Now, we had to deal with the people who were committed to having students love poetry and change the world. This was a sword people were willing to die on, and we're sort of chuckling, but we shouldn't chuckle. It was very deeply held, and it wasn't just in our writing classes and language arts. The science department wanted people to love science as well. They said it a little differently, but the intent was the same. We left a place and an opportunity for faculty on their course syllabi. Why don't you write about an aspiration? That message doesn't have to go away. We're just not going to call it a course learning outcome. It's just going to be the instructor's aspiration for you in this class. That satisfied faculty because it gave the instructors a way to put out there what was important. Yes, I can teach you onomatopoeia. Yes, I can teach you about different types of verse. But ultimately, what I want you to do is to love poetry. So they got to say that. So we put all these things together. This was one of the key things. We talked about making t-shirts about using action verbs and stuff. We just decided that was too over the top and too geeky, so we didn't do that. I want to go back. Oops, I skipped one here. Okay. All right, so in terms of the staggering, there's something else that we learned. So the first year, the faculty were going to rewrite their course learning outcomes, submit them to the deans for review, and then they would go to the Curricular Issues Committee. Because what we decided was when they went to the Curricular Issues Committee, the Curricular Issues Committee did not have the time, nor was it their role to rework outcomes for faculty. They are checking for courses that meet state standards or other designations in terms of courses. So the first year we had all faculty members submit their outcomes to their deans. We just about killed the deans and the deans in the divisions. They just said it was too much. So what we did was the next year we said before these courses are submitted to the dean, they go to a MAC team member for review. And we were not reviewing for content. I helped a heck of a lot of people in health occupations write outcomes because I understand how to write an outcome. I don't know their curriculum, but their deans are going to have a sense of the curriculum. So that process actually worked really well. And in both years, sometimes there might be a disagreement between a dean and a faculty member about whether an outcome was measurable or not. So one of the deans at the college, I could tell when he was just tangling with faculty, because I'd get an email and the tagline would say, MAC consult requested. and would you please contact this faculty member? And invariably what would happen when I'd have the conversation with the faculty member, I would start by listening and say, well, tell me what's going on. You know, your dean asked me to contact you. I know you're working on outcomes. And I would just listen. And mostly the conversation went like, I hate the commission. I hate the college. You have no right to come in and tell me how to teach my class. We used to have freedom. And Christy, I just can't believe you have become a Nazi and a part of this process. And you're getting in the way of education, and you used to be for this. What happened to you? Okay, so what I realized was they were scared that somebody was telling them what to teach in their class. And so then when I come back around, nobody's telling you what to teach in your class. You just have to be able to articulate it so that the students in the community will know that. And all I am here to do is help you articulate that. So let's have a conversation. When you teach this class, what do you want students to be able to do at the end? Well, sometimes what the faculty could do was go on they could give me a long speech, and my job was to help them break that down into here's what I'm hearing. And sometimes what I would say, we would meet together, I would listen, and I would actually even start to draft outcomes for them. Well, this is what I've heard. Does this capture what you say? That was an amazingly welcome strategy. And one of the faculty that I worked with the most, it was interesting because she was very defensive to start with. And at the end, by the time we were working on one of her last courses, she said something. And I said, well, it sounds to me like this. And she says, I know. You're going to ask me, is it a course learning outcome or a course objective? I can tell you right now, I've got it in the wrong spot. It worked. We just had to have the conversations. And a lot of it involved listening. And for people who felt like they were being forced to teach a certain way, it's not what it was about. Now, I will tell you, we have departments at Linn-Benton that have made agreements that everybody's going to teach the same way. We honor that. If that's the agreement that those people in that department have agreed upon, the MAC team doesn't change that. So if there's an internal department agreement, that's fine, but we don't have a dean or a managerial unit that promotes that. Okay. All right. So we had to learn to work smart. We used to send out an email at the end of the term saying, come back here, click here to enter your reporting on your course outcomes. And it was just one more document that faculty had to open. So we worked with the folks in admissions, and this is what our page looks like for where faculty go to enter their grades. I believe this is banner backed. And we just had them put this submit your student learning outcomes link. It doesn't link to Banner, by the way. It just goes out to someplace else on our website. And we created a form. And so when faculty enter their grades on the same page, they can just go in and enter their reflections about their courses. Okay? And it's nice. It just shows up. So when the accreditors came last year in October, we actually received a commendation on the work that we had done. Yeah. we were pretty excited about it. Now, we also got a recommendation at the same time. You know, we giveth and we taketh. Because we'd done all this work around course learning outcomes, but we hadn't done the work of program and institutional outcomes. So we're on it. We think we've got that narrowed down. But that was where we were at. And I think some things that we learned that I would encourage you to think about. One is, just because you can easily collect data doesn't mean that you should. We constantly fight this at my college, whether it's in outcomes or program review. The other thing is, I would say, make assessment operational. We had to change our calendar because we so wanted faculty to have time to reflect and showcase together. At LB, all of our in-service days were 2 weeks at the beginning of the school year in September. This year, our calendar is different. And we have dedicated time at the end of each term, 3 hours, where departments are supposed to get together, talk about what's working, what's not. Department chairs have to send a short email to their deans, and the deans will collect this to make sure that it's been done, reflecting on what the department talked about. But it's how we hope to make this operational and change the culture. I've got 55% there. I think I can get another 40 with this change. And the 10% who won't go there, I think my managers are going to have to deal with that. And I think that's just what you know about working with people. I guess I should also tell you that I personally decided, for the folks who were totally resistant to this, who, by the way, are typically my colleagues who are resistant to everything, and I eat lunch with them every day, I like them. I just decided this was not my battle with them. I wasn't going to spend all my time trying to convince the few who didn't want to do this. I wanted to spend my time with the people who wanted the change, to put assessment as a tool in their toolbox, but also with the people who were cautious but with reason and good practice could be convinced. We also make this operational with new faculty sessions. Linn-Benton runs something called Instructional Strategies Institute in September for all new contracted faculty who were hired. And there is always a session now in there on outcomes. So anybody that gets hired at Linn-Benton learns from day one, you are expected to do outcomes work. You can start where you're at, but we're going to ask you to get better at it. By the way, that's where I make them do the cheer. And then also, we now always include assessment sessions in fall in-service, because at this point, it's not how to write outcomes so much, but it's the conversations or how to measure outcomes. And this is where we capture most of our part-time faculty. And I would leave you with the message that this is just how Linn-Benton did it. I don't think there's a canned approach to figuring out what's going to work at your college. You know your college, you know your culture, and I would pay attention to that because that's what we started with. And I think I have some more stuff, but I think this is probably a good place to end unless...
Questions for Christy?
Yes,
Hang on.
So you talk about you have them do their reflections and they get to put it in banner, and I'm over here dying over the smart catalog and the banner. Are there specific things that have to be in the reflection, or is it literally just the instructor reflecting on that particular outcome?
So I'm really sorry I can't show you the tool, and I will, if by the end of this day, if I can pull it up, I will try to show it to you. So the reflection tool is a laserfish form, so it's just one page. And what happens is it auto-populates with each learning outcome for the course. So at the end of the term, faculty go to the reflection page. You type in your name, you put in your course number and your CRN, so those you have to, we've got drop-down menus for those. And then once you do that, you have boxes. So if you have 5 course learning outcomes, you have 5 boxes. And that's where you do your reflection. What worked, what didn't, what are you going to do differently? We started with a 3-page form. This is where we were asking way too much data. We also started including numbers. And faculty were freaking out about the number thing. I can't tell you how much time we spent on this. And then we just totally got rid of it. But if a class had 40 students, like we had some departments like math that started their classes with 45 students because they thought they would finish the year with 25. And what this process did was they changed their number to 35 maximum students, and they want to finish the year with 35 students. So that was actually a really helpful change. I mean, that was one piece where the numbers got us there, but for the most part, the numbers weren't as important as what the instructor was learning. Yes?
So you were involving part-time faculty this whole time, it sounds like.
Yes.
I'm wondering, did you have to pay them?
Oh, yeah.
So you paid that across the board?
Yes, when I say we were manager supported, when I went and talked with our vice president and said it's important to include part-time faculty, she said, you know, that'll be expensive. And I said, well, you know, accreditation's important. And you pulled us together and asked us how to do this. They swallowed, and they've done it from the beginning.
I know you said that you just finished writing the institutional outcomes. Have you had any chance to assess them, or are they just course outcomes that you've assessed so far?
Oh, okay. So we're gonna do this once again a little differently. I wished I had a board or something to draw on. Here's our. So do we have math folks in here? Oh. So think transitive property, okay? So what we landed on, and we didn't come to this quickly, we have measurable course outcomes for all courses. We are going to align those to programs and gen ed outcomes. Those program and gen ed outcomes will be aligned to the institutional outcomes. And what we are saying is, as long as we keep our course outcomes updated and current and aligned, that if the students meet the course outcomes, they have met the program outcomes and the institutional outcomes. So there's not separate measurements. Our focus stays on the class and the course. I knew that one would get hands.
Well, yeah, that brings up a lot of questions I'm sure other people have, but I'm going back to an earlier question. We'll let that one hang for a minute. In regards to the course learning outcomes, and did I understand that you don't necessarily aggregate any course outcomes results,
Yes.
correct? So do you have any, did you get any feedback from Northwest on that to say, how are you doing on course learning outcomes as an institution?
No. We haven't, did I lose my microphone?
Nope, nope.
We haven't gotten feedback on Northwest from that. Faculty are assessing, and we do have some faculty that do group assessments. For example, like in our writing program, we have inter-reader reliability for Writing 121. All the writing classes take the same final. They're graded twice by multiple instructors. Nursing has that as well. But no, we are not being forced to aggregate and by student and by course.
So, as you talk about aligning those course class outcomes with the gen ed and the program level, we are struggling with what to do with the AAOT, which, you know, JBAC had put together those 24 outcomes, some of which are specific, others which are very general. So what are you doing at the degree level, especially with gen ed?
So, is everybody here familiar with the AAOT and gen ed outcomes? I can talk like you know about that? Okay. So, we didn't get a chance to write those. We don't think we're going to have a chance to influence those. And the takeaway is some of those outcomes as they're written, they're not really measurable. I mean, they're just not. So what we work with faculty on is to try to figure out what the intent of the outcome is and measure the intent. And until the state comes up with something different, that's what we're going with. That's the best thing we've got. It's not exact, but when you don't control it, you have to have a reaction to it. So that was that to us felt like it was a way we could respond with integrity.
Do you align that? Sorry. do you align that with the course outcome work that you've been doing?
Okay, so let's take a class like English 221, which is children's literature at my college, and it is listed as an arts and letters class on the AAOT. So when I look at the arts and letters category on the AAOT, there's probably 30 classes there. We cannot create a tool to capture outcomes from 30 different classes to align them to, I think, 5 in the arts and letters category. So for purposes of measuring gen ed outcomes, when you teach a class like English 221, we want teachers to measure the 3 to 7 outcomes that the department came up with, but we also want them to measure the AAOT outcomes. And we don't map up the course outcomes, we map up to the AAOT outcomes. Does that make sense? It's better if I draw it, but I don't really have a place. And our form is in development. We're beta testing how we're going to do this week 8. So we think we've got it computerized to self-populate so that faculty can see this alignment.
So I'm in the humanities where we have some of the most assessment skeptical people, I think. The poets you mentioned before. And I know we're getting more and more specific in our questions and conversation, but I wonder if I could ask you to take a step back. You began by talking about students and student success and how things were back in the 90s. And I'm just wondering if you could give me some ammunition to take back to my colleagues about how is a student experience at your institution different for a student now than it would be for them back in the 90s, and you have to tell me why it's better so that I can,
like, with 2 seconds to think about that.
Well,
it's fair. It's fair. So, okay, it is better for students because faculty who have gone through this say that it in appropriate ways tightens their teaching experience. They are able to provide an instructional experience for students, a learning experience for students that is more focused. By working on outcomes, it forces faculty to ask questions about their class and how they're preparing the class and how they reach all outcomes for that course. So the change is actually with the faculty, not with the students first. So by starting to think about outcomes, it makes the faculty go back and look at how they're teaching their class. How do I make sure all students are taught in this class? It brings up questions about, do you believe in a bell curve? Because if all students are meeting outcomes, does a bell curve make sense? Or it brings up the question, what if I have 6 outcomes and a student meets 3 of those outcomes and they still get a C? What does that mean? Those are meaty questions for faculty to chew on, and it forces them to dig deep into teaching and learning. That has been the benefit to faculty. For example, I was in a conversation with one of our science faculty just a couple weeks ago, and we were talking, and he said, you know, Christy, since I started doing this outcome work, I'm really starting to think about the math prereq on GS 106, which is a science for non-science majors class. We require high school algebra. I've come to realize I don't need my students to know algebra. What I need them to be able to do is to think like a mathematician. I'm not sure that prereq is actually helpful. Now that is an amazing conversation for faculty to be having. So there was a bit of a leap of faith. And I have to tell you, and the people that I have lunch with that are most resistant are our social science faculty. They too are in that boat. And I love them dearly. They're my good friends. And I still think they need to start to have a conversation, because while teachers can instruct differently, faculty can instruct differently, students at the end of the course should still meet the learning outcomes even if faculty get there in different ways. And that option is still open, which I think will be important to your humanities folks. You don't all have to teach the same way. You don't even all have to use the same assessment if you don't agree on it. But students do have to meet the same learning outcomes. And at our college, learning outcomes were developed by faculty. They were not imposed from above. So it is a loop that faculty can influence. Does that help you at all? Okay. But I will get a better answer for the future. That's a great question.
Other questions for Christy?
Sorry, I just want to go back again to your banner thing because I'm blown away by that. Do you ask for them after they do the reflections? Do faculty need to have any type of artifact or proof?
Okay, no.
Okay.
And so first of all, it's not a banner thing. The link is in banner, but it's to a Laserfish form. No, they don't have to have any proof or documentation. We're about improvement. And so when you start to look at what's the research around improvement and creativity, one of the 6 worst things you can do to kill creativity is to make somebody be evaluated. That is just researched. So there has to be an element of trust. And my field of getting folks ready at the community college is to go into K-12 education. Assessment as a weapon has been modeled for the last 15 years in K-12. We do not want to replicate that. So we focus on improvement of faculty. And so they have to do the reflection. Now the reflections go to the deans. I don't read the reflections that the faculty write. Each of the deans do. Well, our deans supervise faculty. The appraisal process at Linn-Benton is oriented towards personal growth. So if the deans, when they're meeting with the faculty annually, put something as a personal goal about your growth around assessment and the appraisal, it forces a conversation later on. So we're constantly closing these loops and bringing it back around. But our deans are instrumental in helping faculty. So that also means we've had to do work with deans to help them understand assessment. Does that?
I actually had a similar question about you not aggregating data at all, it sounds like, and how you're able to determine if you're meeting your outcomes at the course level, but then taking it up if all you have is, faculty written statements.
Yeah, so that's actually fair. So faculty do, when they teach, they look at who met an outcome and who doesn't. So the faculty member has that information. We just don't collect 12 students met this outcome, 10 students met this outcome, 32 met this outcome. An institution doesn't collect that. I think that in the future, my college is going to have conversations around this whole notion of, well, grades and outcomes and what does it mean to pass a class. For me, that is next generation assessment work. We're not there yet, and it's not also the place that you start. We, in the past, always trusted faculty to make sure that they were meeting learning outcomes. The institution didn't disaggregate that data. We're just not starting it now. So we haven't been held accountable. So if your institution has a different value, this is not a process that's going to work for you. But we just don't want that information. We've always trusted faculty to assess student learning. We're still trusting them to do that.
Any other questions for
anything
Christy?
else?
So I have one, Christy.
Yes.
As a parting thought, with people going back to campus, can you give them one piece of advice? Like, this would be a good place to start. This would be one thing you should take away.
I can't give you a piece of advice, this would be a good place to start, because I don't know your campus, okay, each campus. I would go back and look at the first slides, and I can make this available and share it, so if you want to get a copy of it. But I would look at our principles that we came up with, like faculty-led, accreditation-driven, that we wanted to change the culture. And as you do your work, figure out what your principles are, and then use those to guide you in terms of doing that work. That's what I would say.
So if you will thank Christy for her time.